My name is Aria, 35 years old. Wearing the cream-colored dress I had spent 2 months sewing by hand, I walked into my sister's wedding with a smile and was immediately directed by a staff member straight to the kitchen, where I was expected to help with the buffet service. My sister, Sydney, the one who once stole the man I deeply loved, was now preparing to marry a millionaire in a wedding live-streamed across 4 platforms. And me? I was the eldest daughter, the one who had supported the entire family through the toughest years, stitching clothes just to make ends meet. But today, they said I no longer fit the image of success they had so carefully constructed. The kitchen door shut behind me, muffling the laughter echoing from the grand hall. No one looked at me. No one asked how I felt. No one knew what I carried in the small purse slung over my shoulder. But after that night, no one in that dazzling ballroom would be able to pretend I had never existed. Have you ever been treated like a shadow in your own family? Have you ever sat in a room full of light, only to feel like you were completely invisible? If you've ever felt left behind, leave a comment below. Hit like if you believe everyone deserves to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to hear the full story, one of being forgotten, betrayed, and the response that brought an entire wedding to silence. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building covered in ivy. It's not fancy, it doesn't have a balcony overlooking the Willamette River, but it's a place where I can hear the sound of my own heartbeat. A place where I spent hours sitting at my sewing table, bending over each stitch, each seam, as if I were trying to mend the torn pieces of my own life. I used to be a data analyst for a major tech corporation. After 3 years of nonstop work, I was nominated for a regional director position. I still remember the day I received that email from HR. We're extremely impressed by your skills and professional integrity. Back then, I believed that as long as I worked hard and did things right, everything would fall into place. But I was wrong. 4 years ago, I was suspended from work just 3 days after an internal investigation. The accusation? Leaking customer data to a competitor. No clear evidence. No explanation could restore my name. Everything was erased with a few anonymous emails sent from a hidden IP address. And when I saw the leaked documents nearly identical to a report I had written, but altered, I knew someone had access to the way I stored files and named passwords. A month later, Sydney showed up at a family gathering with her radiant smile and a brand new designer dress. She had just landed a senior communications position at a major TV network, a place I had once dreamed of working. You know, Sydney said while pouring tea into my cup, sometimes success and failure are just one smart minute apart. My mom laughed loudly, like it was the most profound thing she'd ever heard. I sat silently, staring at the rising steam from my teacup, realizing that this game had never been fair. When I told my parents I had been falsely accused, that it wasn't me, my mother simply rested her hand on my shoulder and sighed. Aria, you really should learn to soften up. With your rigidity and coldness, it's hard for anyone to feel for you. My father just quietly placed another potato on my plate, as if that were enough consolation. I used to think family would be the ones to believe in me when the world turned away. But for me, family was the first place to extinguish every defense with a doubtful stare. Since I was young, I had been the child handed the house keys at 12, told to watch over your sister, and taught to be strong because the eldest has to make sacrifices. I sacrificed my youth working, helped my parents pay off debt, and save up for Sydney's out-of-state college tuition. Sydney was always the favorite. Her golden hair, sweet smile, bubbly personality, and quick wit, everyone adored her. Whether she came home at 3 in the morning or broke our grandmother's antique vase, it was always brushed off with a wink or a hug. Me? One blunt comment, and I'd be labeled difficult and rude. I eventually realized that in this family, it wasn't about who was right. It was about who was more charming, who could make others feel comfortable. I didn't have that skill. After losing my job, I couldn't find another role in the industry. The rumors had spread farther than I expected. No one wanted to hire someone once linked to a data breach. I had to leave my nice apartment downtown and move into a small attic unit. I lost direction. But then, One winter night, while patching up the ripped shoulder of an old coat, an idea struck me. If I couldn't keep doing what I was good at, I'd learn to be good at something else. I taught myself how to sew using free online videos. I started with scrap fabric I picked up from a thrift shop. First, it was tote bags, then dresses, then blouses. It took me nearly 8 months to complete my first evening gown. When the woman who wore it looked in the mirror and cried, saying she finally felt truly beautiful, I knew I had found my value again. I opened a tiny workshop on the ground floor of my building. No signs, no ads, but customer by customer, well-fitted piece by well-fitted piece, I found a new path. Not as flashy as my old corporate life, but at least here, no one schemed to take from me out of jealousy or to reclaim what was never theirs to begin with. Sydney never visited my shop. She told people I was making vintage clothes for old ladies and trying to live like a starving artist. I used to get upset, even angry. But those feelings passed, like a pin that keeps pricking the vinches. The same spot eventually, you go numb. I received Sydney's wedding invitation on a rainy afternoon. My mother called shortly after, her voice sticky sweet. If you're free, come a little early to help with logistics, okay? You're the big sister, after all. It's only right you contribute to her big day. I read the invitation carefully. My name wasn't listed on the guest seating chart. Just a small italic note in the bottom corner. Event support. Arya Bride's family side. I folded the card and said nothing, but I had made up my mind. I would go, not to reconcile, not to reclaim anything, but to show them in my own way that I was no longer a shadow in their lives. And I'd start with the cream dress I'd sewn over 2 months of late nights, sitting by the slightly cracked window, listening to Portland whisper outside. That dress wasn't just clothing. It was my voice. My way of walking into that dazzling hall, head held high, no longer feeling small. That morning, the sky over Portland was quietly overcast. Last night's rain still clung to the leaves outside the kitchen window. I sat by my steaming cup of coffee, the wedding invitation half open on the table. The silver-embossed italic letters glinted faintly in the dull light, stabbing me in the chest. Arya support team for catering. I had read that line at least 10 times, hoping it would disappear if I stared long enough. But it stayed, sharp and polite, a rejection masked as organization. The phone rang. Mom? I wasn't going to pick up, but my finger instinctively slid across the screen. Her voice came through immediately, soft but tinged with urgency. You got the invite, right? Yeah. I kept it short. Don't overthink it. I only arrange things that way to keep things running smoothly. After the reception, you can still come into the main hall and sit with the family. It's just, there will be VIP guests. Sydney wants to avoid any hiccups with the media. I stayed quiet, waiting. You know, your sister's now the face of a national TV show. There'll be tons of press. She just wants everything to look consistent. You get that, don't you? I set my coffee cup down. My palms were cold. You mean, I don't fit the image? Her voice hesitated for a second. That's not what I mean. I just don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We're family, you understand. Just help out behind the scenes for a few hours, then stay as long as you want afterward. That sentence echoed in my head all afternoon. We're family, you understand. But when did I become family only behind kitchen doors or behind curtains? I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I just hung up the phone, stood up, and opened the fabric cabinet. I reached for the wooden box I had set aside long ago. Inside was the sketchbook I used for all my designs and a small black USB drive I always kept in my wallet. It held copies of everything I'd ever backed up: emails, spam, notes, images, and the kind of data no ordinary person would think to keep. I am no longer that 17-year-old girl crying by the staircase because I was banned from the prom to babysit. I am no longer the office worker whose entire reputation was stripped away with a single accusation. I am Arya, and I'm going, but not to blend into the background. 1 week before the wedding, I thoroughly researched the resort Sydney had chosen. a luxury lakeside retreat at Lake Tahoe, known for its all-inclusive, high-end services catering to the elite. I contacted an old friend who had once worked on the events team there, asking her for details on the equipment room location, the service gate, and the digital layout of the audio system. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I just needed to make sure they could never ignore me again. That afternoon, when I stepped into the studio, Marlene, the only friend I still spoke to regularly, looked up from the fabric cutting table. "You're really going?" I nodded, then leaned over to adjust the hem of the cream dress I was working on. "Don't tell me you're wearing that to go work in the kitchen." I smiled. "No, I'm wearing this to walk through the door they once locked shut." Marlene stared at me for a long moment before exhaling softly. "You're not coming back as the same person anymore. They have no idea." I didn't respond. Some things don't need to be said. When the time comes, the truth reveals itself. The day before the wedding, my mother called again. She asked if I needed a ride. I declined. I said I'd get there myself. Her voice was a little awkward when she brought up the accommodations. "Well, the place Sydney arranged is a small cabin near the parking lot. It's not the most comfortable, but it's cozy." "A service cabin?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Yeah, something like that. But it's convenient, near the work area, so you don't have to move around too much." I stayed silent. She still hadn't realized, or maybe she refused to admit, that they never asked me what I wanted. They just placed me wherever was most convenient for them. That night, I finished the cream dress. A soft square neckline, a high cinched waist, the skirt flowing down to just above the ankles. I added a row of tiny shimmering beads at the sleeves, not too flashy, just enough to catch the light. I hung the dress on the wooden frame and stepped back a few feet, looking at it under the warm yellow glow. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing I knew for sure: this dress wasn't made to be hidden in a kitchen. At sunrise, I got in the car and drove south for 10 hours. The road, winding along the forest's edge, occasionally opened up to vast views of the lake, light glinting off distant mountains. When the resort finally appeared behind the thick pine trees, my heart skipped a beat. I stopped the car, pulled out my small suitcase, and adjusted my hair in the side mirror. The cream dress fit perfectly to my frame, white heels gliding gently across the gravel. I took a deep breath and walked toward the side entrance, the one designated for staff. A man in a black uniform greeted me with a professional smile. "Hello, and you are?" "Aria Bennett," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "The list says I'm part of logistics support." He flipped through the sheet, nodded. "Yes, here you are. This way, please." I followed him down a long carpeted hallway, soft golden lights glowing overhead. The sound of glasses clinking, gentle music, and distant laughter spilled from the grand hall, a reminder that I was still behind the curtain. As we passed the cold storage room where the wedding cake was kept, I glanced at my watch. Just a few hours left until the main ceremony. I gripped the strap of my shoulder bag tighter, feeling the small USB drive inside grow heavier with every step. I wasn't here to destroy anything. I wasn't here to beg anyone for forgiveness. I was here to remind them that, even if they erased me from the table, I still had a voice. And once I spoke, they wouldn't be able to pretend they didn't hear me. I walked down the hallway leading to the logistics wing, heels clicking lightly against the cool stone floor. The scent of white orchids from the main hall drifted in through cracked doors, mixing with the minty chill of the air conditioning. It was the smell of a perfect wedding on the surface. But to me, everything had already shattered 4 years ago, on a rainy afternoon in Portland. That day, I sat in our usual coffee shop, the one Liam and I often stopped by after his shifts. He was in his final year of medical residency. I was at the peak of my career in the data company. We always met at dusk, warm cups in hand, eyes tired from lack of sleep but still glowing when we looked at each other. I remember every detail of his face that day, his furrowed brow, straight nose, but his eyes had gone cold in a way I had never seen. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked. I frowned, confused. "About what?" Liam placed his phone on the table. On the screen was a screenshot of an anonymous email. The message was short. Aria had an abortion and hid it to milk money out of you. She did the same thing with her ex in Seattle. Check your wallet. I froze. My mouth opened, but my throat was too dry to speak. All I could get out was, "That's not true." He stared at me for a long time, then shook his head. "I believed you. Until I found out you had 2 secondary credit cards I never knew about. They were company issued. I never used them for personal stuff. But you didn't tell me, Arya." I tried to explain, but he was already standing up. "I can't live with someone like that. I can't build a future with a person whose past is full of shadows." And he walked away. Without another word. I called dozens of times after that. I went to the hospital where he worked, left handwritten letters at the front desk, waited for hours in the parking lot just to catch a glimpse of him. But Liam never came back. I had no proof to clear my name. And the worst part was, I didn't even know who sent that lie. Until a year later, at a family Thanksgiving gathering, I saw Liam walk into the house with Sydney. His hand rested gently on her waist, his smile just as soft as I remembered only now. It was meant for someone else. The room spun. I stood frozen by the kitchen counter, still holding a plate of cookies I hadn't even set down yet. My mother was the first to speak, her voice strangely excited. "Oh my goodness, you two kept it quiet. Who would have thought Sydney was dating Liam?" Sydney tilted her head, golden curls falling over her shoulders. "We didn't expect it either, Mom. But love shows up when you least expect it." She turned to me. "You don't mind, do you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have the strength left to. Liam looked at me. His gaze brushed past and drifted away, like I was a stranger he'd once passed on the street. That night, I hid in my old bedroom, face buried in the pillow, trying to cry silently so no one would hear. After that day, I cut contact with my family for nearly a year. When I returned the next Christmas, Sydney was already at the dinner table, a dazzling engagement ring on her hand. My parents raised their glasses to toast the golden couple. No one asked how I was doing. No one remembered what had happened between Liam and me. And Sydney? She smiled brightly and said, as casually as a breeze, "You'll find someone who deserves you, too." But what made me realize everything wasn't just about a romance was this. While cleaning out an old bookcase at my parents' house, I found a printed email the original sent from, the old laptop Sydney used before she left for New York. The final IP address line confirmed the suspicion I'd harbored deep down. The person who wrecked my life, who destroyed the last shred of trust I had with my family, was my own sister. I didn't say a word. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to keep whatever humanity was left in a family where silence had become the default way to preserve a peaceful facade. But today, at this wedding, standing in my cream dress under the golden lights reflected off the crystal ceiling, I knew the silence had to end. I walked into the service area, my hand still gripping the strap of my bag with the USB inside. No one paid me any attention, just another assistant among the many in black and white uniforms. I stopped at the window that looked into the main hall. Through the frosted glass, I saw Sydney standing at the center, her white gown hugging her figure. The spotlights making her look like someone stepped out of a movie. Liam stood beside her, handsome in a black tuxedo, his expression composed, his hand brushing her back in an almost unconscious gesture. I looked at them both, and the bitter ache in my chest was gone. Only a clarity remained, as sharp and clean as metal striking stone. When truth arrives at the right moment, it doesn't have to shout. It only needs to be revealed, gently, like an unexpected wedding gift. A soft wind rustled the tall pines surrounding the resort. The piano music from the grand hall washed over me like something that passed without leaving warmth. I stood at the main reception desk, my hand tight on the strap of my bag, the cream dress clinging softly to my shape. A young woman in a black suit stepped out from behind the desk, her smile the polished, practiced, kind professionalism trains into you. "Hello, may I have your name to check?" "Aria Bennett," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded and opened the guest list on her tablet. Her finger skimmed the screen. A few seconds of silence felt longer than it should. I noticed her brow knit slightly. Then, as if remembering something, she smiled again, an overly bright smile. "Oh yes, Arya, you're listed as logistics support. This way, please." I nodded and followed her around the grand hall where crystal chandeliers reflected in the rows of awaiting wine glasses, and turned into the narrow corridor leading to the kitchen. "You'll be on cold hors d'oeuvres support with the service team during cocktail hour. If you need anything, speak to the manager, Mr. Brantley." She handed me a plastic name badge printed, Aria, Support Crew. Then, without waiting for anything more, she turned and returned to the front desk. I looked down at the badge in my hand. The letters were crisp, neat. It was exactly the polite way they'd always found to put me to the side. The service room sat just beyond the main kitchen. The smell of roasted meat, sauces, and fresh vegetables hit me, mixed with the heat from industrial stoves, making the whole place feel electric. A gray-haired man with a clipboard turned to look at me. "You, Arya? You're right on time. Take this." He handed me a white apron and a pair of gloves. I pulled the apron on and stood beside a long row of tables where 3 people were arranging hors d'oeuvres on trays. My hands moved on instinct. Steady, gentle, precise. But inside, everything tightened. Through the small glass window between kitchen and hall, I could see people entering with radiant smiles, expensive dresses, crisp tuxedos, laughter that sounded carefree. My family was there too. I saw my father adjusting the bow on Sydney's collar, saying something that made her laugh. My mother stood nearby, holding a bridesmaid bouquet, pride shimmering in her eyes. No one looked back toward the door. No one asked if I had arrived. I lowered the tray onto the counter, peeled off my gloves, and stepped closer to the window. Amid the opulence, Sydney stood out like a fairy tale princess. Her dress was a mermaid silhouette with intricate lace down the spine. Her hair fell in soft waves, a silver comb set with pearls pinned in place. She tilted her head and smiled at Liam, the man I once thought would stand beside me for the rest of my life. I couldn't see his face clearly from that distance, but the way he lightly touched her hand, the brief exchange of looks between them, it was enough to make my chest tighten. Not from jealousy, but because the truth sat there brazenly, unashamed. Liam was the groom now, Sydney the bride. And me? I was given an apron and a warning to be careful not to drop the food. One of the young servers nearby turned to me with a shy smile. "Have you worked with this catering company long?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I'm just helping today." She nodded. "You're the bride's sister, right? I heard people say that." I turned to look at her, hesitating. "Yes. She's really pretty, but she seems a bit cool. You, though, seem friendlier." I didn't know how to answer. That friendlier, that being more pleasant, had long been the reason I was excluded from so many family choices. I didn't have a honeyed smile or those expressive eyes like Sydney. I only knew work and silence. Another colleague came in with a tray for me to take to the side cocktail area. I took it, adjusted my shoulder, and drew a deep breath. The hallway from kitchen to cocktail area ran narrow and was carpeted in cream. I walked slowly, my heartbeat pulled taut. As I moved, details of the hall came into sharper view through the window. Rows of tables draped in white silk, towering glass vases of flowers, and a sign in gleaming letters, "The Future Bennets," displayed between 2 rows of columns. I passed a large printed seating chart propped by the entrance and paused. My eyes scanned each name in its elegant, looping font. Sydney and Liam, of course, sat at the center. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, were at the head table with the groom's parents. Under each name, a table number indicated where to sit. I kept looking, but my name was nowhere to be found. No chair, no marker. I existed only on the staff printout for logistics. I turned and headed back toward the service area, my grip on the silver tray tightening. And in that moment, our eyes met. Sydney had just stepped out of the photo area. Her gaze swept over me, as if checking whether I might cause trouble. Then she offered a half smile, one side lifted in a way any outsider would read as friendliness. I knew that smile well. I'd grown up with it, the smile of someone who always believed she'd won. I tilted my head slightly and returned a calm look. No anger, no panic, just the stillness before a big wave. And I carried that wave in the small bag at my hip with something tiny that could change the whole. Glittering event. Not to get revenge, but to reclaim the place that had been stolen from me, quietly, yet in a way that could not be forgotten. I had just set the last tray of hors d'oeuvres on the cocktail table when the event manager told all staff to fall back to the service room while the main ceremony began. I nodded and quietly turned away, my hand adjusting the apron that snagged at my waist. Walking down the cream-carpeted corridor toward the back, I suddenly heard the men's restroom door ajar. Voices carried from inside, tense and slightly rushed. "Are you sure you've got this right? This is my wedding day. Please don't sow doubts on a day like this." That was Liam's voice. I froze. Another man's voice answered, deeper and more formal. "I have no reason to invent this, Liam. I just think you deserve to know. I'm an internal auditor at Mileson Bank, and I reviewed the loan application filed under your name signature, social security number, even protected, medical information. Everything matches too perfectly to be a coincidence, but I'm certain it didn't come from you." I gripped my bag strap at my hip. My heart raced. "You're saying Sydney's behind this?" Liam's voice dropped, as if he was forcing himself not to speak louder. "She didn't sign it herself, but the documents were submitted from a device accessed via her home IP address, and the financial verification bears a forged stamp from the parent company. Do you understand? If that loan is approved after the wedding, you become legally responsible, not her." Silence stretched. I could hardly hear anything else. Then Liam's voice came, hoarse. "Why me? Why would she do that?" "You're asking the wrong question. The right one is, what is she planning to turn you into after the marriage?" I slowly took my phone from my pocket, opened the voice record mode, my hand trembling slightly but holding the device close to the crack of the door. "I don't believe she's capable of that," Liam said, his voice very low. "Believe or not is up to you, but I forwarded copies of all documents to your private attorney like you asked last week. And my advice to you, act before it's too late." The sound of a sink running echoed. A footstep approached the door. I startled, pulled the phone back, and stepped into a dark corner behind a large artificial potted plant, my heart pounding in my chest. The door swung open. A middle-aged man in a light gray suit stepped out, his face tight, eyes sweeping the empty corridor. I pressed my back against the wall and forced myself to breathe slowly. A few seconds later, Liam emerged. 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, his tie askew, his hand gripping his phone as if he wanted to crush it. He looked at no one, bowed his head, and hurried toward the back stairwell. I watched his figure disappear into the shadowy stairwell before I dared breathe. My hand still held my phone. The screen's blinking light showed the recording was active. I hit stop and saved it immediately. I returned to the service room and hung my apron up. Voices rose from the main hall. The processional music was up, guests moving into the ceremony area to witness the ring exchange. I sat on a wooden chair by the window, my back against the cool wall, eyes on the tree-shaded courtyard. I had never wanted to break anything, but now everything felt clearer than ever. 4 years ago, I lost everything over a single falsehood, and now the truth was coming at Liam from directions he could never have expected. I remembered his eyes when he'd looked at Sydney in the hall. That look was no longer the pure love of a man about to wed. It was the look of someone trying to lift a curtain of trust that had been drawn for so long. A soft knock sounded at the door. I turned. It was the young woman from the hors d'oeuvres team. "Miss Arya, someone's asking for you out by the VIP corridor." A tall man, with brown hair and a tux, he looked stressed. I stood, my heartbeat quickening with each step. I left the room and walked the hallway toward the VIP outer area. A cool breeze swept in through the open door. Under the shade of a large maple by the stone path, Liam stood with his back turned, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly shaking as if he'd just sighed. I walked up slowly. He turned when he heard my shoes crunch on the gravel. "Arya," he said first, his voice low and hoarse. I need to ask you something. I nodded, said nothing. 4 years ago, I received an anonymous email accusing you of fraud, abortion, hiding things from me. It was Sydney, right? I looked at him. His eyes no longer avoided me. No anger, only emptiness and exhaustion. I can't speak for someone else, I answered slowly, but I can let you hear a recording. From less than 15 minutes ago. I opened my phone and pulled up the recording. As the voices played through the small speaker, I watched Liam tense, his eyes glued to the screen like he was hypnotized. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react immediately. He listened all the way through. At the end, he took a step back, his hand dropping, his chest heaving. Oh my God, he whispered. I'm about to marry someone I don't really know. I neither nodded nor denied it. I let him face what he'd just heard. Let him confront a belief that had been toppled without warning. Liam turned to me, his lips pressed together. Thank you. Not because you recorded it, but because you didn't walk away, even though you could have. I looked at him. I walked away before, but today, I stayed, not to prove anything, but to remind them, I'm still here. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the mint scent from the potted plants by the entrance. Only minutes remained before the ceremony began. But perhaps no one would expect that. The opening of the day had just taken a very different turn. I walked slowly back to the kitchen, my breath still uneven from the encounter with Liam. Inside me flowed a quiet, heavy current of feeling. The truth had begun to find its way, and from now on, I didn't have to carry it alone. In the dim, warm-lit service kitchen, staff hustled to finish the final touches for the reception. 2 chefs from the main kitchen were bringing out the 3-tier wedding cake to the prep counter. It was ornate, covered in ivory fondant, decorated with sugar orchids and a muted gold trim around each tier. I knew that cake. I had read the detailed design in an email Sydney had sent to the head pastry chef, one of the copies I had acquired, thanks to an old friend who still worked at the event studio. The bottom layer was vanilla with strawberry. The middle layer, the important one, was red velvet. The fondant around that middle tier was made slightly hollowed to accommodate a small revolving floral topper. But the thing I needed wasn't the topper. I stood by the refrigerated counter, adjusting my gloves, surveying like someone checking quality control. A young staffer approached with a list of trays to be taken out. Is the middle tier ready? He asked. I nodded. Almost. You go ahead, let me check it one more time. He left, and I quickly reached into the fabric bag at my hip and pulled out a small silver USB drive, no longer than the tip of a finger. I'd wrapped it in a thin medical-grade plastic and sealed it with invisible adhesive. Inside it was the recording of the conversation between Liam and the auditor, along with the financial documents showing the forged signature that Sydney had submitted to the bank system, all carefully organized in a folder named Sweetest Lie. I found the exact seam between the fondant and the sugar flowers, gently peeled back a corner as if correcting a flaw. Beneath the thick frosting was the soft cake core. Using a clean chopstick, I carved a small hole, slipped the USB in so it fit snugly, then sealed it with a prepared piece of soft, cream-colored fondant. I smoothed the surface, used a warm spoon to meld the fondant back together so it looked seamless. To the naked eye, no one could see any difference. An old pastry chef glanced over and nodded at me. Careful work. For a support staff, you've got a sharp eye. I smiled softly, said nothing. He had no idea that inside the dessert Sydney had prepared to celebrate the peak of her life, there was something that would choke her not because of taste, but because of what she never expected to be brought into the light. I stepped back toward the rear of the kitchen, washed my hands thoroughly and removed my gloves, then watched as the staff wheeled the cake out. The stainless steel cart's rubber wheels hummed across the tiled floor, heading toward the main ballroom where guests were already lifting glasses and laughing. The wedding moved into the main reception. The music shifted to a gentle classical jazz tune. The event coordinator spoke into the microphone. Please welcome the bride and groom to cut the wedding cake, marking the first sweet moment of their new journey. Applause erupted. The large door between the kitchen and the main hall opened just enough for staff to bring the cake in. I slipped into a side corridor where I could see the stage without stepping onto it. I stood in shadow behind a marble column, where the stage lights could not reach. Sydney stepped onto the stage to applause, her arm lightly draped around Liam. I could see the stiffness in his movement, the way he pressed his lips when she squeezed his hand in front of the cameras. But Sydney, as always, was flawless in her expression. A brilliant smile, shining eyes, every gesture calculated down to the centimeter. The three-tier cake was placed at center stage. Sydney bent to adjust her skirt and accepted the silver knife from the attendant. Liam stood beside her, one hand resting, lightly at her waist, the other holding the knife's handle. "Let's count down," the MC cheered. 3, 2, 1. Cheers rose. Sydney lowered the knife and sliced a smooth cut into the middle tier, the exact spot where I had hidden the USB. The fondant peeled away perfectly. A slice was placed on a fine china plate. Sydney lifted it for the MC to photograph, then turned to Liam, holding up the small silver fork for him to feed her the first bite. Liam didn't move. "Liam?" Sydney tilted her head. "What are you doing? The whole room is waiting." He looked at her, longer than necessary. Then he leaned in and whispered something that made Sydney freeze. Her mouth parted in surprise. Liam reached into the inner pocket of his vest and pulled out another USB. Not the one I had hidden a copy. He raised his hand. "Excuse me, everyone," he said into the microphone. "Before we go on, I have something to clear up. I believe everyone here, especially both families, has the right to know." The room fell silent. Sydney stood motionless, her hand rigid on her wedding gown. I put my hand over my heart and felt each beat thud like a drum. And then I saw it the moment everything started to crack. No noise was needed, just the truth. And truth always finds its way to be seen. I stayed tucked behind the curtain in the corridor, the light from the main hall casting my shadow long on the stone floor. My hand still gripped the strap of my bag. My heart pounded as if I were the one standing on that stage, not Sydney. The three-tier cake sat pristine on the glass table, light reflecting off the fondant like crystal. The audience buzzed, camera shutters clicked, cheers and applause rose like a carefully choreographed show. Sydney bent gracefully to accept the long silver knife from the attendant, nodding slightly to Liam. He hesitated a beat, then placed his hand on the knife with hers. 3, 2, 1. The MC counted down again, drawing another round of applause. The knife descended and cut through the thick fondant. But before reaching the cake layers, there was an odd metallic sound, metal striking glass. Sydney froze and tilted her head slightly. "What is that?" she murmured, eyes fixed on the place the knife had touched. One corner of a small silver box bobbed above the red frosting. A staff member quickly wiped the frosting away with a napkin and pulled it out. Sydney stared at the unfamiliar object in the server's hand. Her face went pale. The box was opened. Inside lay a slim USB with a faint silver rim and a small folded note resting on top. She picked up the note, her hand trembling a little. In all caps, printed clearly, it read, "Before you sign the marriage documents, listen to this." Noise in the ballroom cut off as if someone flipped an invisible switch. Guests looked at one another, whispering. A few people raised their phones to record, assuming it was some staged spectacle. Sydney stiffened. She turned to Liam, but he only stared back, silent. From the crowd, a tall man in a black suit stepped forward. Ethan. He was Liam's close friend and also the family's legal counsel. Ethan asked for the microphone, his voice steady and without hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is a solemn and memorable moment, but I have been authorized by the groom himself, Liam Ford, to open and present the contents of this device. The recording you are about to hear was taken from a real conversation that occurred this morning in the wedding's backstage area. It directly concerns the groom's legal standing and potential risks if this marriage proceeds." Sydney spun toward Liam, her face ashen. "What are you doing? This is our wedding. You can't." Liam did not answer. He only stood with his lips pressed together. Ethan plugged the USB into a portable device with built-in speakers and set the volume to medium, Sound began to fill the ballroom. Are you sure you have this right? This is my wedding day. Please don't sow doubts on a day like this. Liam's voice, clear. A deeper voice answered, I have no reason to fabricate this, Liam. I'm an internal auditor at Mileson Bank, and I reviewed the loan application filed under your name, the signature, the social security number, even protected medical details. Everything matches too perfectly. But I'm certain it didn't come from you. In the hush, each sentence cut through like a blade. Do you understand? If that loan is approved after the wedding, you become legally responsible. Not her. Liam's voice sounded again, weak and choked. Why me? Why would she do that? The right question is, what is she planning to turn you into after the marriage? Everyone fell silent. Someone gasped. An older guest shook her head and covered her mouth. As for me, hidden behind the curtain, I saw Sydney standing frozen under the lights, like a wax figure, melting under a great heater. The carefully applied makeup on her face was trembling now. Mascara began to streak at the corners of her eyes. Ethan stopped the recording and looked around the room. The full information, including bank documents and evidence of the forged signature, is saved on this device and is now pending legal review. Sydney turned to Liam, her voice nearly a shout. Do you really believe that garbage? This is staged. I didn't do anything. Someone is trying to ruin our wedding. Liam took a step back. His expression was no longer angry, only weary. I don't need to believe anyone anymore, Sydney. You lied to me from the start. You fabricated things about Arya. You stole her life. And now you want to make me into a debtor so you can get assets after the wedding? Who are you listening to? Her? Arya, right? It's all her fault. Sydney pointed down the hallway as if guessing I was hiding in the shadows. The whole ballroom held its breath. I did not step forward. I didn't need to. Liam inhaled deeply, then turned to Ethan. Do you have that unsigned document? Ethan withdrew a stack of white folders from his jacket pocket and handed them to Liam. He held them up for everyone to see, then spoke slowly and decisively. This is the marriage license, and I formally refuse to sign it. A long, tearing breath split the air. A glass clinked and broke somewhere in a corner. A few guests began to stand. Sydney sagged, bracing herself on the cake table, breathing hard. Are you going to ruin me over an unverified recording? She demanded. Liam looked at her. No, you did that yourself. I simply stopped pretending not to see it. The atmosphere in the ballroom grew heavy, like a quiet funeral. People looked at each other, then at Sydney, once the center, the spotlight now quietly melting away like the fondant on the cake she had just cut into. I stepped back, my hand loosening on my bag strap. No more words. Were needed. The frosting had melted, and the truth had begun to do its work. I remained in the corner of the hallway, where darkness wrapped around me like a cloak. Inside the ballroom, everything was starting to fall apart, piece by piece, like the layers of cake softening under the stage lights. Sydney stood as if turned to stone, still holding the cake knife loosely. Eyes darting between Liam, Ethan, then back to Ethan again as if searching for someone familiar to cling to. But everyone had stepped back. Liam, she said, voice trembling and thin as a thread. Do you think I did those things? Liam said nothing. He just looked at her for a long time. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't disappointment either. It was something deeper awakening. I believe what I can see with my own eyes and hear with my own ears, he finally said. Not because anyone pressured me, because you can't deny it. Sydney staggered back a step, then spun, toward the crowd, as if remembering something. It was her, she screamed. She did all of this. Arya. She's always been jealous. She could never accept that she's less than me. See? She wants to ruin my wedding. She wants to take everything from me. A ripple of whispers ran through the guests. People started murmuring. Some covered their mouths with their hands. Some raised eyebrows in skepticism. My father rose from the head table, his voice low but clear. Sydney, that's enough. She turned to him, eyes rimmed with red, hair disheveled from frantic shaking of her head. You're siding with her too, Dad? My daughter stands here, slandered and humiliated in front of hundreds, and you side with the saboteur? My mother stood beside him, her face drained, clutching her purse as if afraid she might faint. She said nothing, only stared at Sydney as though trying to find the perfect daughter she had believed in. Celeste, Liam's mother, rose from the groom's table, tall and composed, her face not angry but commanding. She walked to the center of the room where all eyes had turned. As your future mother-in-law, she said slowly, I have the authority to end this ceremony, and I declare, this wedding is over. A hush seemed to fall from the ceiling. Then, like a reflex, someone began to applaud. At first, just a few scattered claps. Then it spread, building into a roar like thunder. Those claps weren't congratulatory. They were a release. The audible exhale of people who had just watched a drama end at the right moment. Sydney stood amid the applause, like someone lost. You people are insane, she muttered, looking around, but no one returned her gaze the way they had before. At the next table over, I saw a young woman lift her phone to film a TikTok, whispering to her friend, Oh my God, this is like a movie. Bride gets exposed while cutting the cake. This will go viral. Sydney heard that. She spun around to shout, but no one cared anymore. No sympathetic faces, no reaching hands. I stayed rooted in the dark, not stepping out, not speaking, but the guests' eyes began to find me. I felt it when a group of people turned back, whispering, then looked toward the hallway where I stood. Others craned forward, trying to peer past the floral wall. A camera light swept across me, a live feed in motion, someone streaming as they followed the room's gaze. I still did not step out. I didn't need to. My silence had become the clearest voice. Celeste turned her head toward me, though she couldn't see me fully in the dim light, but I knew she was searching for me. Aria, she called out, loud but gentle. If you're still here, thank you. Sydney turned back, and for the first time since it started, she was silent, her lips pressed together. Her hand gripped the wedding dress as if she could tear it apart. My mother finally stepped forward. She no longer looked composed or confident. She reached and laid a hand on Sydney's shoulder, but Sydney jerked away. Are you siding with her now, Mom? Sydney demanded. My mother didn't answer. She only looked at her daughter as if seeing a stranger. When did you become like this? She whispered. Like what? Ambitious? Wanting more? Is that wrong? Sydney scoffed, though her voice was starting to crack. I did what I had to do to get the life I deserve. By stepping on others? My mother asked, and this time her voice was colder. By inventing lies, manipulating, then blaming others when you're found out? She said nothing. She turned and hurried toward the back door, her wedding dress sweeping the floor with a whisper, leaving behind the murmurs, the looks, and the dreams she had built from lies. I stood still for a few more seconds, then turned and quietly left the corridor. Behind me, the music in the ballroom had stopped. Only the whispers of people beginning to understand remained. Not everyone in a white dress is innocent, and not everyone who works in the kitchen is an outsider. Sydney vanished through the heavy wooden door leading to the side hallway. The click of her high heels echoed against the marble in broken beats. In the reception hall, people still stood as if unsure whether to sit or to keep watching what would happen next. No one was laughing. No glasses were clinking. I stepped out of the shadows. The lights from the main hall fell across the cream silk carpet and cast my shadow long. Quiet gazes followed me, some astonished, some sympathetic, others thoughtful. My mother stood in the aisle, her face pale, clutching the little clutch as if to hold on to the only thing that felt secure. She looked at me, and her eyes were no longer angry or dismissive. It was something like recognition of a person she had never truly looked at for all those years. Less than a minute after Sydney left, the door burst open again. She rushed back in as if pushed, face flushed, hair disheveled, hands shaking as she clutched a stack of papers. Don't think you can humiliate me and get away with it, she screamed, voice already hoarse. You think you won, Arya? You always wanted to destroy me. You're jealous of everything I have. You never could stand that I was loved more, noticed more. I didn't move. She didn't look me in the eye as she spoke. Sydney's gaze swept the crowd, hunting for a reason, for someone to take her side, a single sympathetic look. I did everything to live well. I just wanted a chance at a better life. But what about you? You couldn't stand my success, so you sabotaged me. You pushed me into the pit. My mother stepped forward then, her voice steady as if trying to keep control of the chaos. Sydney, what are you saying? This whole wedding is watching you. Let them watch, Sydney nearly yelled. Let everyone see her true face. Arya is always there, pretending to be quiet, pretending to be kind. But everyone knows she hates me. She wanted me abandoned like she once felt. My mother moved closer and placed a hand on Sydney's shoulder, as if to calm her. Sydney shrugged the hand off roughly. Don't pretend to defend me anymore, Mom. Deep down, you always thought Arya was the one who had it hard. You feel guilty. So now you let her take revenge on me. People began whispering louder. I heard a woman say to her friend, "She's not well. Who screams like that at their own wedding?" Then my father's voice rang out from the head table, low but firm. Enough, Sydney. She turned, as if stopped by that familiar tone. My father stood and slowly walked to the center of the room. His gaze was no longer vague or hesitant. I have been silent too long. Letting you push others aside, letting your mother spoil you, letting you think you can do anything with no consequences. Sydney shook her head repeatedly. Dad, you don't understand? No, you're the one who doesn't understand. He paused and looked her straight in the eye. You forged my signature to secure a $50,000 loan. You said it was for investment, but it was actually for gambling debt. You used Arya's name to hire a private event company, using her credit to get promotions. I have the documents. Celeste sent them to me this morning. A murmur of "oh" rippled through the room. Sydney stood there, her face drained of color. You, she began. Arya deserves an apology, my father said clearly, without looking back. And no one in this family has the right to deny that anymore. Sydney stepped back until her back hit the flower-decorated table. White orchid petals fell onto her gown, settling among the lace and the fabric creased from her earlier movements. My mother stood motionless. For the first time, she could no longer hide the look of confusion. The world she had believed up until now, that image of a gentle, well-behaved, perfect daughter, crumbled like a sandcastle in a sudden storm. Sydney burst into real sobs. Not the carefully staged tears of makeup, but true, heavy, lost sobbing that stuck in her throat. She slipped off her shoes and kicked them away, then suddenly ran, her gown catching on the floral display and tearing a side of the train. The ballroom fell utterly silent. All eyes followed that stumbling white silhouette until she disappeared through the rear exit, where the emergency door only opens in special circumstances. No one chased her, no one followed. I stood there, slowly turning to face my mother. She remained frozen, as if caught in the flash of a long-buried memory. Then she turned to look at me this time, truly looking at me, not through the lens of the cold eldest daughter image. I said nothing. I did not need to. Something in her gaze began to melt. Not tears, rather the shell of pride built up over years of choosing only the comfortable truths. She nodded, just slightly. Small, but enough for me to see. I looked away, walked slowly toward the back door to the service area. As I passed Liam, I paused for a second. He looked at me, and his eyes were different. No longer distant, no longer as cold as they had been 4 years ago. I'm sorry, he said, quietly enough for only me to hear. I nodded slightly. No answer. I continued on. My footsteps merged with the wood floor, soft as if I had never been submerged in this place. Only one thing had changed. Now I was no longer walking in the dark. A week later, I returned to Portland. The air was crisper than before, the late afternoon sun stretching long across damp red roof tiles, holding drops of dew. I parked in front of my little sewing studio, the bell over the door chiming a familiar note as I stepped inside. The room was the same smell of new fabric, beeswaxed thread, the scent of sleepless nights woven into drawers and worn wooden chairs. But something had changed, not the space me. That day, when I opened my computer to check orders, more than 30 emails waited. A few old clients sent congratulations, several strangers wanted custom designs. One subject line caught my eye: girl who sewed her own wedding dress, pushed into the kitchen, then silenced the whole ballroom. I clicked. It was a TikTok video taken by a young guest. In it, I flickered through a blurry frame, standing tucked in the corridor, hand gripping my bag, eyes steady. Then Sydney screaming, Liam holding up the unsigned marriage license, Celeste announcing the wedding's end. All under one short caption. They didn't seat her, but in the end, the whole room looked at her. The video had nearly 1 million views. Comments were full of lines like, "She walked straight out of a movie," or, "Hold your head up, sister, you're not as small as they thought." I didn't know who had filmed it. I wasn't sure how I felt. But something warm crept in, something I hadn't allowed myself to believe for years. Recognition, without pity. The next morning, my small studio was busier than usual. A middle-aged couple came in asking about a simple wedding dress, but one that has a story behind it. A college student wanted to order a party dress, the same cream color as the dress she wore that day. They didn't know my name, but they knew I was the woman who wasn't seated at the table and yet made the whole ballroom stop. I didn't need to say anything. I just nodded, opened my sketchbook, and began to draw. That afternoon, I was rearranging fabric in the back corner of the shop when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. The caller ID read, Liam. I hesitated a moment, then answered. No formalities, no beating around the bush. Hi, he said, his voice deeper, a little hoarse as if still carrying the echo of that day. I just wanted to ask, could you meet me for a bit? I stayed silent for a beat, then replied softly, like a breeze. I don't think that's necessary, Liam, he faltered. I just wanted to apologize. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. You don't need to realize it late. I just need to know. I'm no longer living in anyone's shadow. There was no response on the other end. Just a silence, as if he were weighing whether to say more than giving up. I didn't hang up quickly. I let that silence wash over like the last current of a stream. Then I let it end. I stood and returned to the drafting table. A week later, I opened my first solo exhibition in a small space on the banks of the Willamette River. White walls, warm amber lights, each garment spaced so a person could step back and take in not only the fabric, but the emotion folded into every seam. I hung the cream dress in the center of the room, beside a small wooden placard handwritten by me. I was once placed in the kitchen. Now, I choose to stand on my own stage. I didn't write Sydney's name. I didn't mention family. I didn't tell about the USB or the interrupted wedding. Those who needed to understand would understand. Those who had once stood in the dark would see themselves in this light. No one who came in left quickly. They watched. They fell silent. And then they walked to the registration table to ask if I took private commissions. I nodded, without hesitation. There are things that don't require forgiveness, wounds that don't need anybody to fix. It's enough that we stop hiding them and stop letting them define us. What do you think of my story? If you've ever been pushed into a shadow within your own family, called names that aren't who you truly are, then perhaps you'll understand what it felt like to stand in that cold kitchen, quietly watching others raise a glass over the hurt you carry. But I believe that all of us reach a moment when we step out of that darkness, not to seek revenge, but to live, fully, without bowing, without asking permission to exist. My story is not meant to elicit pity. It's a reminder that sometimes what we need most isn't an apology. It's a chance to stand up and reclaim the place we deserve. How about you? Have you ever been put in the wrong place in your own life? Leave your thoughts below. I'd love to hear the stories of people like me, those who endured in silence yet chose to keep living with dignity and gentleness. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join me in discovering more stories small slices of family life, where, sometimes, the things no one dares say are the things that wake us up. Thank you for listening.